The chandeliers at Silverleaf Hall glimmered like captured stars, scattering warm light over polished marble floors and crystal glassware. Music drifted softly through the air, the kind of elegant melody meant for people who belonged in places like this. Adrian Lee sat alone at the last table near the exit, pretending to scroll through his phone. His suit was neatly pressed, but a little worn at the edges, the same one he wore to company functions he could never afford to enjoy. On his wrist, a slim rainbow bracelet caught the light. Subtle, but unmistakable. It was the only detail that felt truly his. He told himself he didn't mind being alone. Weddings had never been his thing. He was here out of family obligation, a distant cousin's grand celebration where every guest seemed paired off and perfect. Adrian sipped from his glass of sparkling water, watching laughter ripple through the tables closer to the stage. His seat might as well have been in another zip code, but he was used to that distance. Across the room, his 5-year-old son, Noah, was spinning in circles with the other kids, his laughter cutting through the symphony of polite conversation. That sound grounded Adrian more than anything else. He smiled faintly and lifted a hand in a quiet wave when Noah looked his way. The boy waved back, unbothered by the lavish chaos around him. At least one of them knew how to have fun. A shadow crossed the table. "You look like you're planning an escape." The voice was smooth, warm, threaded with quiet amusement. Adrian looked up and froze for a heartbeat. Standing there was Elliot Vaughn, the CEO of Northlight Publishing, the company where Adrian worked as a mid-level editor. In person, Elliot looked taller than he did at company meetings. His tuxedo fitted perfectly, his expression sharp but not unkind. His brown hair was slightly tousled, his tie loosened as if he'd grown tired of playing the role of perfect guest. "Mr. Vaughn," Adrian said quickly, almost spilling his drink, "I didn't realize you were here." "Please," Elliot replied, a small smile curving his mouth. "It's Elliot tonight, not at work." He gestured toward the couple at the head table. "The groom and I went to university together. I thought I'd stop by to toast his happily ever after." Adrian nodded, suddenly aware of the small tear in his cuff he had stitched himself that morning. "That explains why the entire business elite is here." Elliot chuckled. "And yet somehow you and I ended up at the quietest table in the room." Before Adrian could think of a response, Noah's laughter turned into a startled squeak. The boy had bumped into a waiter, sending a splash of orange juice across the floor and onto Elliot's vest. Adrian's stomach dropped. He started to rise, but Elliot waved him off. "It's fine," Elliot said easily, kneeling beside the boy. "I've seen worse boardroom disasters." From his pocket, he produced a folded napkin, dabbing at the mess while pulling a coin from behind Noah's ear with a magician's flair. "There, fixed." Noah's eyes widened in wonder. "How did you do that?" "Trade secret," Elliot said with a wink. Adrian could only stare. The CEO, who normally commanded a boardroom with a single glance, was kneeling on marble floors in a $1,000 tux, comforting a child he had never met. It was disarming. It was also strangely human. When Elliot returned to the table, he gestured to the empty chair beside Adrian. "Mind if I join you?" Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "Of course." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, the hum of conversation filling the space between them. Elliot poured himself a glass of champagne, swirling it thoughtfully. "You're in acquisitions, right? I remember seeing your name on the reports for the Western Ridge series." Adrian blinked. "You actually read those?" "I like to know who's keeping the company alive," Elliot said, his eyes glinting with humor. "You have a good eye for stories that sell, and apparently for avoiding dance floors." "I'll leave that to the coordinated people," Adrian replied, a little shy but amused. A photographer drifted toward their table, camera flashing in every direction. "Smile, gentlemen," she said brightly. "One photo for the album." Adrian started to protest, but Elliot leaned in, his voice low enough for only him to hear. "Pretend I'm your husband tonight." Adrian froze. "What?" Elliot's smile didn't falter. "Just for the photo. People around here love a story, and you look like you could use a shield from all their pity." The flash went off before Adrian could answer. For a moment afterwards, the noise of the ballroom faded, leaving only the sound of his pulse in his ears. Elliot's hand rested lightly on the back of his chair. Casual, confident, almost protective. It was an easy gesture for him, maybe meaningless, but to Adrian, it felt like standing too close to something he didn't quite understand. The spell broke. Adrian cleared his thoughts, trying to steady his thoughts. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Elliot said quietly, "but I wanted to." Noah returned a few minutes later, his small face flushed from dancing. He climbed onto Adrian's lap and pointed toward Elliot. "That's the magic man," he announced proudly. "Is that so?" Elliot said with a grin. "Well, don't tell anyone. I've got a reputation to keep." Adrian laughed despite himself. The conversation turned lighter, weaving through harmless topics, childhood stories, the chaos of publishing deadlines. It was oddly easy talking to someone who usually felt a world away. At one point, Elliot's gaze drifted to the rainbow bracelet. His tone softened. "Nice bracelet. Doesn't seem like office wear." Adrian hesitated, then smiled faintly. "It's not, but it reminds me who I am when I'm off the clock." Elliot nodded slowly.
Something unreadable in his expression. Good reminder. As the evening carried on, Adrian realized he had stopped watching the clock. The loneliness that had followed him into the ballroom had eased without him noticing. Elliot was different from the image that filled company gossip columns. He was charming, yes, but there was depth beneath the polish. When the newlyweds took to the dance floor, Elliot leaned closer again. "You know," he said, voice barely above the music, "people are staring less now. Guess the fake husband thing worked?" Adrian's lips curved. "You seem awfully confident in your performance." "Years of practice," Elliot teased, "but tonight felt different." Adrian met his gaze, unsure how to respond. The lights reflected in Elliot's eyes like gold. For a brief moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, as if everything else had blurred away. Then Noah tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, I'm tired." Adrian blinked, reality slipping back into place. "Right, we should go soon." Elliot stood, straightening his jacket. "It was good seeing you, Adrian. Maybe we'll talk again at work, preferably without orange juice involved." Adrian smiled, a little dazed. "Sure, thank you for earlier." Elliot's grin softened into something genuine. "Anytime." As he walked away, Adrian caught himself watching. The confident stride, the quiet strength, the faint trace of kindness that didn't fit the rumors. He didn't know what to make of it or why that one whispered line kept replaying in his mind, "Pretend I'm your husband tonight." He told himself it meant nothing, just a joke between strangers caught in a moment. But as he gathered Noah's small jacket and glanced once more toward the ballroom doors where Elliot had disappeared, a part of him already suspected the night wasn't done rewriting the story of his life. The next morning began with sunlight slicing through the blinds of Adrian's small apartment. He was pouring cereal for Noah when his phone buzzed nonstop on the counter. The first message came from a coworker, followed by another, then 10 more. His heart dropped before he even opened them. Every text contained the same image, shared, edited, and reposted. It was the photo from the wedding, the one with Elliot's hand resting casually on his shoulder. The caption beneath it was bold and impossible to ignore. "Publishing CEO spotted with mystery man and child. Secret family." Adrian froze with the phone in his hand. He could feel Noah tugging at his sleeve, asking for milk, but his mind was somewhere else. His inbox flooded faster than he could swipe. Friends, colleagues, even distant relatives wanted to know the truth. He hadn't even had time to tell anyone about meeting Elliot properly, and now the internet had already written a love story for them. By the time he arrived at the office, the whispers had already spread. Conversations paused when he walked into the elevator. People pretended to check their screens, but their eyes flicked toward him. He held his head high, clutching his coffee cup as if it could anchor him to something solid. Inside Northlight Publishing's main building, the usual calm had vanished. Assistants rushed through hallways with folders, phones rang endlessly, and everyone spoke in half-sentences. Adrian reached his desk only to find an email marked urgent from HR. It requested that he stay available for a company statements regarding online speculation. The words made his stomach twist. Across the city, Elliot Vaughn sat in his corner office, surrounded by glass walls and morning chaos. His phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Every outlet, from business magazines to gossip blogs, had picked up the story. The photo of him, Adrian, and Noah was everywhere. His assistant entered with wide eyes. The board wants a statement within the hour. They're already drafting something about misunderstood context. He leaned back, exhaustion in his shoulders. Misunderstood context? He repeated softly. That sounds like a lie before it's even told. They're suggesting we emphasize your upcoming engagement to Clara Delane, she continued hesitantly. It would end the rumors quickly. He stared at the skyline beyond the window. The city looked steady from up here, so far removed from the noise below. He had known the engagement was coming, a merger disguised as romance, something arranged by families and shareholders. It had always felt like a business decision, not a life choice. Now, with one photo, that entire facade was cracking. Elliot stood abruptly. Cancel the statement and the engagement. The assistant blinked. Sir, that's not what the board expects. Then they'll learn to expect something new. His tone was calm but final. At noon, the company's press conference began. Cameras lined the hallway outside the Northlight lobby waiting for him to appear. Reporters shouted questions before he even stepped onto the podium. The lights were blinding, the noise suffocating, but Elliot's expression didn't waver. I've seen the photos. I know there's been speculation, so let me clarify something. His voice carried, measured, and deliberate. I'm not straight, and I'm not ashamed of who I am. The words fell into silence, followed by a wave of flashes. No one in the room moved for several seconds. Then the questions exploded like fireworks. He didn't stay to answer any of them. He simply walked away, leaving the microphones behind. Adrian watched the broadcast from the staff lounge, his heart pounding. He hadn't expected Elliot to say that, not in front of cameras, not for the world to see. People in the room looked between each other, some shocked, others whispering about courage or recklessness. Adrian couldn't breathe for a moment. He slipped out quietly before anyone could speak. By evening, his phone had turned into a battlefield. Journalists camped outside his building, shouting questions up the stairwell. Online comments ranged from supportive to cruel. Someone even found his old social media posts about being a single dad. The attention felt invasive, suffocating. He wanted to disappear. When he finally managed to get Noah to sleep, there was a knock on the door. His heart jumped, expecting another reporter. Instead, Elliot stood there, dressed simply in jeans and a dark jacket, his face unreadable. I shouldn't be here, Adrian said immediately, voice low. This is just going to make it worse. Elliot nodded once. Probably, but I needed to see if you're okay. I'm not, Adrian admitted before he could stop himself. You said a few words and my life turned upside down. People won't stop calling me your whatever they think I am. Elliot stepped inside only after Adrian moved aside. I didn't plan any of this, he said quietly. I was supposed to lie today. I was supposed to say I'm engaged to Clara, smile for the cameras, pretend my life fits the story they want. But when I saw that photo, something in me snapped. I was tired of pretending. That doesn't mean you had to drag me into it, Adrian said sharply. His voice trembled between anger and confusion. You could have come out without turning me into your headline. Elliot looked at him for a long moment, the calm in his expression hiding something heavier. You're right, you didn't ask for this. But when I saw you in that picture with your son, I realized what it looked like wasn't wrong. It looked like something real. Something I've wanted for a long time. Adrian stared at him, words caught in his throat. The honesty in Elliot's voice was too raw to dismiss, but the chaos outside their walls felt louder. Tomorrow, Elliot continued, the company will be in damage control mode. They'll probably ask you to issue a statement denying any involvement with me. If that's what you want, do it. I won't blame you. Adrian folded his arms, his pulse racing. What do you want me to say? That I barely know you? That the photo means nothing? Elliot's eyes softened. Only if you believe that. The silence stretched. Outside, camera flashes flickered faintly through the blinds. Adrian could almost feel the world waiting for his next move.
He wanted to tell Elliot to leave, to make this all go away, but instead he heard himself ask, "Why did you even notice me that night?" Elliot smiled faintly, a tired, genuine curve of his mouth. "Because you were the only person in that room who didn't care who I was. You looked like you'd rather vanish than talk to anyone, and somehow that made me want to talk to you." Adrian exhaled slowly. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," Elliot said, "but I'm not going to hide anymore, and I'm not going to let the people who run my company decide who I'm allowed to care about." The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Noah stirred in the next room, turning over in his sleep. The small sound broke the tension like a pin to glass. Elliot stepped back toward the door. "I'll handle the media," he said softly. "You just focus on your son. Let them talk. The noise will fade." Before Adrian could answer, he was gone. The apartment felt different in his absence, heavier, yet strangely charged. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. He watched headlines roll across his phone screen, each one rewriting his life with words he hadn't chosen. He told himself it would blow over, that Elliot's bold confession would soon be replaced by another scandal. But deep down, he knew this wasn't temporary. Something had shifted, not just in the company, not just in the public eye, but inside himself. When dawn came, the light through the window felt colder. Adrian made coffee and watched the steam curl upward, trying to steady his thoughts. He remembered Elliot's voice, steady under the spotlight, saying the words he'd never imagined hearing from someone like him. "I'm not straight, and I'm not ashamed." The line echoed in his mind like a challenge. For the first time in years, Adrian wondered if he had been hiding too, not from the world, but from the possibility of something bigger than survival, something that might start with one reckless sentence whispered at a wedding and change everything that followed. The storm hit harder than either of them expected. By the second week after the press conference, Northlight Publishing looked less like a business empire and more like a field of nervous whispers. Caution replaced greetings in the halls. Executives avoided eye contact when Elliot's name came up. The board moved fast, forcing him to take a temporary leave for image recovery. In polite terms, it meant they wanted him silent and invisible until the headlines changed. Elliot accepted without argument. He had seen it coming. The meeting room felt like a courtroom, and he was the defendant who already knew the verdict. Outside the glass windows, the city sparkled as if mocking the quiet collapse of his reputation. When he left the building, cameras were waiting again, flashes bursting like lightning. He didn't flinch. He just told the reporters one thing before stepping into the car. "I'll come back when the truth matters more than the noise." That night, Adrian sat on his couch with the TV muted, watching the news ticker scroll across the screen. Words like controversy and corporate fallout bled into every broadcast. He felt exhausted from existing in the background of someone else's crisis. Noah was playing with building blocks nearby, humming softly to himself, unaware of the tension hanging over the room. Adrian envied his son's ability to forget the world so easily. When a knock came at the door, he hesitated. It was late, too late for neighbors or deliveries. He opened it a few inches, only to find Elliot standing there again, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Can we talk?" Elliot asked quietly. "It's about the press outside your building." Adrian frowned. "They're still here?" "Half the tabloids camped out after dark. Some even approached your landlord. You and Noah can't stay here right now." "I can handle it," Adrian started, but Elliot shook his head. "You shouldn't have to. Come stay at my place for a few days. The penthouse has security. No one will bother you there." Adrian stared at him, unsure if it was concern or guilt driving him. "You think hiding me fixes this?" "No," Elliot said simply, "but it gives you a little peace until the noise dies down." Adrian looked past him at the dim hallway. Flashlights flickered outside the window. For the first time, he realized how visible his life had become. He glanced toward Noah, already half asleep on the couch. He sighed. "Fine, just until it calms down." The drive through the city was quiet. Street lights slid across the car windows, painting fleeting lines of gold on Elliot's face. He didn't try to talk. Adrian appreciated that silence more than any explanation. When they arrived at High Ridge Tower, the contrast was staggering. The building stood above the skyline, its entrance lined with marble and soft amber lights. The elevator ride felt endless, rising through glass walls until the city unfolded beneath them. Inside the penthouse, the air smelled faintly of cedar and coffee. Minimalist furniture filled the wide living area, the kind of design that suggested control, not comfort. Elliot showed them the guest rooms. "There's space for both of you. Make yourselves at home." Noah ran straight toward the giant windows, pressing his small hands against the glass. "It's like an airplane," he whispered in awe. I couldn't help but smile. "Don't lean too close." Elliot watched them, something soft crossing his features. "He's a good kid." "He is," Adrian said, turning away. "He deserves normal, not all of this." "Then let's give him that, even just for a little while." The following days passed in an uneasy rhythm. Elliot worked from his home office, managing crises over video calls. Adrian spent his hours answering endless HR messages, drafting official statements, trying to sound neutral while protecting his privacy. Reporters kept guessing about their relationship, twisting every silence into confirmation. Despite the tension, a strange calm grew in the spaces between. Morning routines formed. Elliot brewed coffee early, and Adrian cooked simple breakfasts. Noah joined them at the table, chattering about cartoons and school. In the evenings, they watched movies, until the boy fell asleep on the couch, his head resting on a cushion too expensive for peanut butter stains. One night, after putting Noah to bed, Elliot found Adrian on the balcony, looking over the glittering skyline. The city below felt distant, almost unreal. "You should be angry with me," Elliot said, without turning. "I was."
Admitted, but anger takes energy, and I'm running out of that. Elliot exhaled, his breath forming a faint mist in the cold air. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. When I said those words at the conference, it wasn't strategy, it was relief." "Relief?" Adrian asked quietly. "I've spent years building walls to fit into a life that never belonged to me. Then I saw that photo. You, your son. The way you looked at him, like the world still made sense. I realized what I was missing." Adrian leaned on the railing beside him. "You barely know me, Elliot." "Maybe, but I know what I felt that night. It wasn't a trick of the lights." The honesty in his tones startled Adrian. He turned to look at him, but Elliot's gaze stayed fixed on the skyline, as if speaking to the city instead of him. The moment stretched, fragile and strange. A noise from inside broke the spell. Noah had woken, wandering sleepily into the living room. Elliot went to him first, crouching down. "Hey, little man, can't sleep?" Noah rubbed his eyes. "Had a dream about the orange juice monster." Elliot laughed softly. "That guy again? Let's scare him away." He lifted his hand like a magician, pulling a coin from behind Noah's ear. The boy gasped, delighted, then wrapped his arms around Elliot's neck. Adrian watched quietly, the warmth in his chest impossible to ignore. When Noah finally went back to bed, Elliot lingered near the hallway, still smiling faintly. "He trusts me," he said, as if surprised. "He trusts people who make him feel safe," Adrian replied. "And you?" Elliot asked, his voice low. "Do you?" Adrian hesitated. "I'm trying to." The next morning, the world found them again. A headline flashed across news feeds, claiming Adrian had moved in with Elliot. There were photos, 2 grainy shots of them entering the tower late at night. The comments were merciless. Some called it romance, others opportunism. HR demanded explanations. Adrian felt the walls closing in. "They'll never stop," he said, pacing the living room. "Even if I disappear, they'll keep talking." Elliot stood in the doorway, calm but firm. "Then let them. They don't get to define who you are." "This isn't just about me," Adrian snapped. "Noah deserves a life without people whispering about his father." "I know," Elliot said softly. "That's why I'll handle it. I'll make sure they leave you alone." But that promise was impossible to keep. Within hours, news stories appeared.
Anonymous sources hinted at favoritism, claiming Adrian had used his connection to Elliot for promotion. None of it was true, but truth didn't matter anymore. That evening, Elliot called a meeting with the company's interim board. He refused to let them fire Adrian, arguing that the accusations were baseless. His words carried power, but also risk. Every defense he made for Adrian deepened the perception that they were more than colleagues. When he returned home late that night, his shoulders looked heavier. Adrian met him at the door, eyes searching for answers. "Did it work?" "Not yet," Elliot admitted, "but I'll fix it." Adrian shook his head. "You can't fix what people want to believe." Elliot studied him for a long moment. "Maybe not, but I can show them the truth." The room went quiet. Outside, rain started to fall against the glass. The city lights blurred, turning into streaks of gold and silver. Elliot stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Pretend I'm your husband tonight," he said, almost a whisper. The same words from the wedding, but this time there was no smile in his tone. "Let them see what they think they already know. Then maybe they'll stop searching for dirt." Adrian looked at him, unsure if the idea was reckless or brilliant. "You want to fake a relationship again?" Elliot met his eyes. "Maybe, or maybe it's time to stop pretending." The rain kept falling, soft and steady. Between the sound of thunder and the pulse in his chest, Adrian couldn't tell where caution ended and something deeper began. He didn't know if Elliot's plan would quiet the world or destroy what was left of their peace. But for the first time, he didn't want to run from the chaos. He wanted to see where it might lead. The world felt like a maze of headlines and whispers. Every morning brought a new rumor, each one sharper than the last. Northlight's leadership began to fracture under pressure, and Elliot became the company's most controversial name. Anonymous reports claimed he was using company resources for personal entanglements. Others said Adrian had manipulated him, painting their connection as scandal instead of humanity. Adrian stopped reading after the first few lines. It didn't matter anymore. Truth had lost its value. One afternoon, the HR director called him in for a private meeting. The woman's voice was polite but clipped. Each word weighed with caution. "For your own peace, perhaps it's best to take unpaid leave until the situation resolves." Adrian nodded without argument. He walked out of the building with his resignation form unsigned but already decided. His time at Northlight was over, even if no one said it aloud. Back at High Edge Tower, the mood was quiet. The penthouse that once felt like a refuge now felt temporary, like borrowed calm before a larger storm. Elliot was pacing near the window, phone pressed to his ear, his tone cold and controlled. When he saw Adrian enter, he ended the call. "They're voting to remove me permanently," Elliot said simply. "Daniel Moore has been feeding the board selective information, old messages, fabricated context, whatever he could twist." Adrian rubbed his forehead, a dull ache forming. "You can't fight everyone." "I can try," Elliot answered, then paused. "But you shouldn't be caught in it. If you want to walk away, I'll understand." Adrian looked at him, the weight in his chest too heavy to disguise. "Walk away and let everyone believe I used you? That I took advantage of some powerful man who pitied me?" He shook his head. "No, I've survived worse, but I won't survive being rewritten into someone I'm not." Elliot's eyes softened, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed again. Another crisis, another demand for explanations. He silenced it and set it aside. "Let them talk for now. Tomorrow, I'll face the board myself." The next day, the meeting unfolded like theater. Reporters gathered outside, waiting for a headline. Inside, the boardroom gleamed with polished wood in a strained patience. Elliot stood at the head of the table, his posture unshaken. Daniel sat 3 seats down, feigning calm. The conversation began with polite phrases about accountability, then turned to accusation. Words like misconduct and image damage floated around like daggers. Elliot listened until the noise became unbearable, then spoke with the same precision that had once built his empire. "You hired me to lead this company because I told stories that sold. But the best story I've ever told is my own truth. I'm not resigning because you're uncomfortable with who I am." The room went silent.
The chairman adjusted his tie, trying to maintain composure. "Your personal choices are not the issue, Elliot. The distraction is. Then the problem is your inability to separate integrity from appearances," Elliot replied. "Adrian Lee is one of the most capable editors you've ever employed. If anyone in this room leaked those lies, you'll find yourself answering to more than the press." Daniel's face hardened, but he stayed silent. When the meeting ended, Elliot knew it was only the beginning of another storm. He left the building to a sea of cameras. Flashbulbs burst against the gray sky. Someone shouted his name, asking if he was stepping down. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his voice over the crowd. "Yes, I'm gay. And no, I'm not ashamed. The people you write about are human. Remember that before you print another lie." By nightfall, the video went viral. Some praised his courage. Others called it recklessness. But beneath the noise, something shifted. The comments were not all cruel this time. Many were voices of support, strangers who understood what it meant to live honestly in a world built on facades. Adrian watched the coverage from the living room. Noah was asleep, his soft breathing filling the silence. Elliot arrived later, still wearing his suit, though his tie hung loose and his eyes looked exhausted. He sat down beside Adrian without a word. "Did it help?" "I don't know," Elliot admitted, "but I couldn't let them turn you into a scandal." Adrian studied him for a moment. "You didn't have to defend me." "I did," Elliot said, "because I care, and because it was my fault you ended up here."
There was no smile in his tone. Let them see what they think they already know. Then maybe they'll stop searching for dirt. Adrian looked at him, unsure if the idea was reckless or brilliant. "You want to fake a relationship again?" Elliot met his eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe it's time to stop pretending." The rain kept falling, soft and steady. Between the sound of thunder and the pulse in his chest, Adrian couldn't tell where caution ended and something deeper began. He didn't know if Elliot's plan would quiet the world or destroy what was left of their peace, but for the first time, he didn't want to run from the chaos. He wanted to see where it might lead. The world felt like a maze of headlines and whispers. Every morning brought a new rumor, each one sharper than the last. Northlight's leadership began to fracture under pressure, and Elliot became the company's most controversial name. Anonymous reports claimed he was using company resources for personal entanglements. Others said Adrian had manipulated him, painting their connection as scandal instead of humanity. Adrian stopped reading after the first few lines. It didn't matter anymore. Truth had lost its value. One afternoon, the HR director called him in for a private meeting. The woman's voice was polite but clipped, each word weighed with caution. "For your own peace, perhaps it's best to take unpaid leave until the situation resolves." Adrian nodded without argument. He walked out of the building with his resignation form unsigned but already decided. His time at Northlight was over, even if no one said it aloud. Back at High Edge Tower, the mood was quiet. The penthouse that once felt like a refuge now felt temporary, like borrowed calm before a larger storm. Elliot was pacing near the window, phone pressed to his ear, his tone cold and controlled. When he saw Adrian enter, he ended the call. "They're voting to remove me permanently," Elliot said simply. "Daniel Moore has been feeding the board selective information, old messages, fabricated context, whatever he could twist." Adrian rubbed his forehead, a dull ache forming. "You can't fight everyone." "I can try," Elliot answered, then paused. "But you shouldn't be caught in it. If you want to walk away, I'll understand." Adrian looked at him, the weight in his chest too heavy to disguise. "Walk away and let everyone believe I used you? That I took advantage of some powerful man who pitied me?" He shook his head. "No. I've survived worse, but I won't survive being rewritten into someone I'm not." Elliot's eyes softened, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed again. Another crisis, another demand for explanations. He silenced it and set it aside. "Let them talk for now. Tomorrow, I'll face the board myself." The next day, the meeting unfolded like theater. Reporters gathered outside, waiting for a headline. Inside, the boardroom gleamed with polished wood and strained patience.
Elliot stood at the head of the table, his posture unshaken. Daniel sat 3 seats down, feigning calm. The conversation began with polite phrases about accountability, then turned to accusation. Words like misconduct and image damage fluttered around like daggers. Elliot listened until the noise became unbearable, then spoke with the same precision that had once built his empire. "You hired me to lead this company because I told stories that sold. But the best story I've ever told is my own truth. I'm not resigning because you're uncomfortable with who I am." The room went silent. The chairman adjusted his tie, trying to maintain composure. "Your personal choices are not the issue, Elliot. The distraction is. Then the problem is your inability to separate integrity from appearances," Elliot replied. "Adrian Lee is one of the most capable editors you've ever employed. If anyone in this room leaked those lies, you'll find yourself answering to more than the press." Daniel's face hardened, but he stayed silent. When the meeting ended, Elliot knew it was only the beginning of another storm. He left the building to a sea of cameras. Flashbulbs burst against the gray sky. Someone shouted his name, asking if he was stepping down. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his voice over the crowd. "Yes, I'm gay. And no, I'm not ashamed. The people you write about are human. Remember that before you print another lie." By nightfall, the video had gone viral. Some praised his courage, others called it recklessness. But beneath the noise, something shifted. The comments were not all cruel this time. Many were voices of support, strangers who understood what it meant to live honestly in a world built on facades. Adrian watched the coverage from the living room. Noah was asleep, his soft breathing filling the silence. Elliot arrived later, still wearing his suit, though his tie hung loose and his eyes looked exhausted. He sat down beside Adrian without a word. "Did it help?" Adrian asked quietly. "I don't know," Elliot admitted, "but I couldn't let them turn you into a scandal." Adrian studied him for a moment. "You didn't have to defend me." "I did," Elliot said, "because I care, and because it was my fault you ended up here." The words hung between them heavy with something unspoken. For weeks they had danced around it, hiding behind strategy and circumstance. Now there was nowhere left to hide. "You keep saying you care," Adrian said slowly, "but do you even know what that means for someone like me? I've spent years trying to prove I belong in rooms that still look at me like I don't. I can't afford another illusion, not from you." Elliot turned toward him, his voice low. "It's not an illusion. I know how it looks."
How fast it's all happened, but I've never been clearer about anything in my life. The air between them felt charged, the city lights painting soft reflections on the glass. Adrian wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at his chest. "You'll wake up one day and realize this was all because of the pressure, because of guilt, because I was just there when you needed someone." "Then let me prove you wrong," Elliot said simply. Before Adrian could respond, a call came through from the hospital. It was unexpected, a voice from administration asking for Elliot by name. There had been an incident in the company parking lot. Daniel Moore had confronted an employee, an argument escalating into an accident. Elliot listened in silence, his expression tightening. "Is he alive?" he asked after a pause. Relief crossed his face when the answer came. "Good, I'll come down." Adrian stood. "I'll go with you." At the hospital, chaos hummed in the fluorescent corridors. Security officers filled out reports, and Daniel sat on a stretcher, his arm in a sling, still fuming. Elliot spoke briefly with the investigators, clarifying that Daniel would no longer represent Northlight in any capacity. On their way out, they passed a pediatric ward. A nurse carrying a sleeping child passed them, and Elliot stopped without reason. His expression changed, something tender flickering in his eyes. "My sister used to bring me here," he murmured. "Our mother worked nights in this building. Funny how some places never lose their ghosts." Adrian glanced at him. "You talk about ghosts like you still see them." "Sometimes I do," Elliot said, his voice soft. "That's why I keep fighting, to make sure no one else disappears under someone else's story." When they returned to the penthouse, rain streaked the glass again. Adrian made tea while Elliot changed into a worn t-shirt, the tension finally easing from his frame.
They sat on opposite ends of the couch, both too tired to pretend composure. After a long silence, Elliot said, "I want to tell you something, and I need you to hear it fully." Adrian looked up. "I didn't fall for you because of what people said," Elliot continued. "I noticed you long before that night, the way you fought for stories others ignored, the way you spoke about your son like he was your whole world. It reminded me what it means to live for something real. You didn't need me to save you. I needed you to remind me who I am." Adrian's throat tightened. He had been bracing for a confession, but not this, not the kind that sounded like truth. Elliot leaned forward slightly. "I can't promise the world will understand, but I can promise I won't run when it doesn't." Adrian met his gaze. "You're making this sound easy." "It isn't," Elliot said with a faint smile, "but maybe that's the point. The best things never are." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. The rain softened, turning into a steady rhythm against the glass. Adrian felt the weight in his chest shift, not lighter, but steadier. Elliot's hand brushed against his, tentative but certain. "Pretend I'm your husband tonight," he whispered again, this time not as a joke or a cover, but as a quiet plea. Adrian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The distance between them dissolved in the silence that followed. Somewhere below, the world kept arguing, writing, and rewriting their story without consent. But inside that quiet room, for the first time, neither of them cared what it sounded like. The storm eventually passed, but its echo lingered in the quiet. Weeks went by before the city's headlines began to shift toward newer scandals, leaving Elliot and Adrian in a space that felt both calm and uncertain. The board had named an interim director, and Northlight Publishing continued to operate without Elliot at the helm. For the first time in years, he wasn't buried under meetings or obligations. For the first time, he had time to breathe, to think, to feel what he had been avoiding. Adrian spent those weeks rebuilding his own rhythm. He worked remotely with small freelance projects, keeping himself busy while Noah adjusted to a quieter routine. The penthouse felt too big for them, too polished, but Elliot refused to let them leave until it was safe. He didn't argue about it. He simply accepted that Elliot had become part of their daily life, though neither of them dared to define what that meant. Every morning, Noah ran through the wide hallway, his laughter echoing off marble floors. He had claimed the smallest guest room and filled it with books, toy cars, and a blanket fort. Elliot often joined him, crawling inside the improvised tent and reading bedtime stories in a deep voice that made the words sound like music. Adrian would stand at the doorway, watching the scene with a mix of disbelief and warmth. The man who once ruled boardrooms now sat cross-legged under a blanket decorated with cartoon stars. It was ridiculous, and yet it was real. One afternoon, while Noah was at a playdate arranged by a neighbor, Adrian found Elliot sitting at the kitchen island surrounded by papers. Contracts, reports, and a half-written letter were spread out in front of him. "You're working again," Adrian said, setting down a mug of coffee. "Old habits," Elliot replied, "but it's not company business. It's a statement for the press. I'm formally stepping down next week." Adrian froze. "You're resigning completely?" Elliot nodded. "It's time. I built Northlight from ambition, but it doesn't feel like mine anymore. Maybe it never did. I want to create something new, something without the walls we had to climb just to be seen." Adrian looked at him carefully. "You mean something that belongs to you?" Elliot smiled faintly. "To us, maybe, if you'd want that." The words landed softly, but they struck deep. Adrian didn't respond immediately. The idea of starting over frightened him, yet a quiet part of him longed for it. That night, after Noah had fallen asleep, they sat on the balcony. The air was cool, carrying the scent of rain and the hum of the distant city. Elliot leaned back in his chair, eyes on the skyline. "You know, when I came out to the world, I thought I was choosing freedom, but it wasn't that simple. Freedom without direction is just noise. You gave it meaning." Adrian glanced at him, surprised. "I didn't do anything." "You stayed," Elliot said, "when it would have been easier to leave." Adrian looked out at the horizon, the lights shimmering across the dark water. Maybe I stayed because I wanted to see if this could last longer than the headlines. Elliot's hand brushed against his, light and uncertain. Do you think it could? Adrian didn't pull away. I think it already has. The following week, Elliot made his announcement. The press conference was small, quiet, held in the same hall where he had first declared his truth months before. Cameras lined the back of the room, though the questions were gentler this time. He spoke briefly about integrity, leadership, and the importance of building workplaces that valued people over image. When asked for his future, he only said, "I plan to write again." When it was over, he walked out into the street where a handful of supporters waited. Among them were employees from every level of the company, some holding signs of thanks, others simply clapping. It was the first time Elliot saw a smile without restraint since everything began. Later that day, they returned to the apartment together. Noah ran into Elliot's arms the moment he stepped through the door. "Did the bad people stop being mean now?" he asked in his small voice. Elliot laughed softly. "Something like that, buddy. They just needed time to understand." Adrian stood behind them, watching as Noah clung to Elliot, his little arms wrapped around Elliot's neck. For the first time, the image didn't feel like a misunderstanding. It felt right. Over the next month, Elliot began his new venture, a smaller publishing collective focused on independent voices. He named it True North. Adrian joined as senior editor, though he insisted on being hired formally like everyone else. The early days were chaotic and unglamorous, but it was theirs. There were no corporate masks, no rehearsed smiles, only long hours, shared meals, and the quiet certainty that they were building something from honesty. One evening, after a long day reviewing submissions, Elliot invited Adrian and Noah to dinner outside the city. The restaurant overlooked a lake, its surface calm under the fading sunset. When they arrived, the table was already set with candles and 2 glasses of wine. Noah had been dropped off earlier on a sleepover with a family friend, leaving the 2 of them alone for the first time in weeks. Adrian looked around, amused. "This feels suspiciously like a date." "Maybe it is," Elliot said, pulling out his chair. "After all, we've already survived everything else. We might as well enjoy dinner." The conversation that followed was slow and warm. They spoke about Noah, about books, about the ridiculousness of trying to make sense of a life that kept changing. When dessert arrived, Elliot reached into his pocket and placed something small on the table. It wasn't a ring, not yet, but a simple charm in the shape of a compass. "I thought about the night we met," he said softly. "You looked like someone who wanted to disappear, and I looked like someone pretending I had everything figured out. Somehow, we both found direction in the same place." Adrian turned the charm over in his palm. "You really named the company after me? Didn't you?" Elliot smiled. "After us." The evening faded into laughter, the kind that came easily now, unguarded and real. Months later, their lives settled into something steady. Elliot's new company thrived, and Adrian's work brought him recognition without the shadow of scandal. Noah started school, proudly showing off drawings of his 2 dads during art class. Adrian had tried to correct him once, but Elliot had stopped him with a quiet shake of his head. "Let him call it what it feels like," he had said. Spring arrived with soft wind and clear skies. They moved into a townhouse near the park, smaller than the penthouse, but filled with warmth.